Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you? How you doing is what I usually start. I decided to change it up. How are you? How are things going in your world? We're fine. It's Wednesday, January 31st, 2018, end of the first month of January tomorrow. Happy February to all of us. And then, of course, Groundhog Day coming up. Can I get away with running the February 1st show, or do I need to run the February 2nd show on every other subsequent day? How would that work in the movie? We don't have Friday will be the 2nd, so I can't really do this on Monday. All right, the joke is already falling apart. Doesn't even matter. It is the day after the State of the Union, his first actual State of the Union, as we have pointed out numerous times on the show. And I told you I wasn't going to watch it, and I didn't. I was very busy, and I made it plain in the morning post. Yesterday, for me, was about the kids' homework and scout meetings and basketball practice and all the things that come in between, getting dinner together, getting people ready to pack it in for the night. And this time I didn't even really get to spend any time watching people watch it on Twitter. I saw the very end of the reaction stuff as he was winding up, and but most State of the Union addresses are mostly worthless, and all you can do is you can hardly blame the traditional media for scoring it on optics, questions, etc. So we'll have a roundup with that, of course, as Greg Dworkin joins us with his headlines in the morning, and then we'll have Joan McCarter in the second half of the show. So we'll be well covered with respect to what happened last night. Joan had to watch. She was forced to do that. And Greg, of course, would have done it presumably by choice, so he could bring you a random sampling and or perhaps even a directed sampling of headlines and reactions from this morning, and we'll all have a good laugh about how ridiculous our president is, and then we'll probably cry. I see that he did spend some time screeching about MS-13 yesterday, and so you should all know that he is, of course, the founder of MS-13, just as he claimed that Obama was literally the founder of ISIS, and then said, of course, he was the most valuable player. I did pick up this morning that the Hill was passing on the report from God knows where, that Google searches for MS-13 spiked by over 4,000% after Trump's State of the Union featuring MS-13. That's basically how it should be listed. And from all accounts that I was able to pick up on last night, as usual, his discussion of immigration was in the context of the massive crime wave sweeping the nation and perpetrated entirely by illegal immigrants, which is, of course, non-existent and untrue in any way you approach it. Of course, those of us who actually have read the statistics know that immigrants tend to be far less likely to commit such crimes, mostly because they're trying very hard. It's interesting. I know they're able to make that meme fly among Fox News viewers and other weirdo conservatives and crotchety old folks and whatnot, because it sounds like it's true. If you're an illegal immigrant, the first thing, this is the way they think of it, the first thing you do when you come to this country is break the law. And then after that, once you've broken the law once, you're just like addicted to it and you just can't stop. And then eventually it becomes cocaine and murder and whatnot, just like it is for you. You speed, you get a ticket, and then suddenly you're cooking meth in your bathtub, and it's just a downward spiral, as we all know. All of us being crime lords, of course, by now, we're well aware of this. Of course, the number one priority for folks crossing the border, even if they do cross the border illegally, is, of course, avoiding arrest. So they are perhaps more practiced than the rest of us at avoiding arrest, and that usually means avoiding criminal activity. Keeping your head down, staying out of sight. The last thing they want to do is give police a reason to look for them in particular. So, it's a different way of looking at things. That beautiful music, of course, as Donald Trump would describe it, means that it's Greg Dworkin calling in, and for some reason, there we are. It takes about 19 tries to get the Mac Mini to acknowledge that the mouse is at the bottom of the screen, and you have to give me the toolbar so that I can answer. So there's Greg. Good morning. How are you?
Hey, how you doing?
Are you in MS-13 now?
No. Isn't that one of those universal solvents?
Yeah. Yes. It's right. We used to use WD-40. I quit WD-40 and joined MS-13 this morning.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah. WD-40 is not a solvent, though. It's a lubricant. But hey, whatever.
Yeah, Waterworks, dimethyl sulfoxide or one of those,
Yes,
DMSO
water is a
or
universal
MS-13,
solvent.
Or maybe it's PG-13. I don't know. It's so confusing.
Right. MS-13 is the rating of the last Stormy Daniels film.
Did you know MS-13 is actually a very violent gang that started in America?
It's homegrown. I like that.
America
That's good. We like to make things in America, and I'm pleased. It was, I do have to, in truth in labeling, it was assembled from some foreign parts.
So that part of his speech, the immigration part, which is a big chunk of the first part of the speech, was vile and loathsome, by the way.
Oh, good.
And
it's
set off the whole speech in terms of how it went.
Uh-huh.
And basically, there's two interesting things about this. The first is that it was a speech that was directed at his base.
Okay.
Right. And so what he did is he put all the red meat in there, but put nice words around it so he could say to his base, look, base, I am being bipartisan. It certainly was not intended for us, for people who don't like him. And some commentators made the point that perhaps what he was trying to do is reach the 10% who had voted for him but had drifted away. I don't know that that's the case. As is always the situation with speeches like this, you watch it mostly, not us because we feel like we are obligated, but you watch it mostly if you like him and you don't watch it if you don't like him. So the people that like the speech people that watch the speech really like the speech, the Insta polls say. Does that tell us anything? Not really.
No.
So what happens, what happens is we wait for him to do the next tweet. So here are some interesting reactions, I think, on the whole. I collected a lot of them in the pundit roundup today, and some of them are on Twitter. Charlie Pierce had, I think, the most interesting one, the most cogent, pithy one.
Oh.
Which is the only interesting thing about this speech is what an utter crock it is.
That's about what I figured was going to happen and what people would be likely to say about it.
Conservative Republican, but unfond of Trump, Evan Siegfried wrote, here's the thing. It's a good speech, but the problem is the messenger is one of the majority of Americans don't give credence to. And he said it politely, but there's going to be a lot of that in terms of the theme that Trump trying to sell himself, it ain't working. For example, Peter Baker in the New York Times actually had that as one of the headlines. I sent you a bunch of headlines that I had done. And the salesmen most still aren't sold on, or Trump tries to move past tumult in State of the Union speech. That's kind of the theme there. But it just doesn't work. And what Peter Baker wrote is the challenge for Mr. Trump is that even as he sells the economy with the fervor of a real estate developer, he's not been, and that is to say a con man, he has not been able to sell himself. His approval ratings remain at historic depths, effectively unchanged after a year in office. His success at passing tax cuts and the continued progress of the economy he inherited have not changed the dismal views that a sizable majority, let me emphasize that, majority of Americans hold of their president.
Yes.
In other words, most people think he's a liar and unfit for the job. Most people. So if you try to appeal to your base, maybe you already have them and you don't gain anything otherwise. I mean, he does that. Somebody said he does that religiously. That's all he does, and that's because he knows if he loses any part of them, he'll tank completely. The Sisters of Mercy, who are like nuns,
I see.
Family unification has long been a pillar of U.S. immigration policy. Referring to family unification as chain migration is dehumanizing and degrading to families. And Greg Siskin notes on Twitter that Andrea Mitchell is noting that the speech was one lie on top of another.
Well, I wouldn't doubt that. That certainly was my assessment.
What I'm trying to say is that it wasn't the, oh my gosh, she's now presidential and here's the pivot. That was actually incredibly lacking yesterday.
Oh, well, that is good news, and maybe there's something to the fact that so many people spent the last couple of days saying, "Oh God, here it comes," and they read it and said, "Oh, I don't want to do that." Yeah,
I'll do something else, but I won't do that. Here is Mark Barabak in the LA Times. Dueling Trumps deliver a State of the Union speech likely to widen a deep partisan divide. I think that's the right way to look at it. For over an hour Tuesday night, presidential Trump vied with pugnacious Trump. The White House had promised a conciliatory and uplifting State of the Union address, which is one of the reasons why when you step back and look at the big picture, this is so funny. Because they promised us, of course, that this was going to be something different than it was.
They're good at promises.
Trump stakes, hello, Trump University. Don't ever believe a thing this liar says. The White House had promised a conciliatory and uplifting State of the Union address, which stood to reason. It's one thing to inveigh against the mess Trump said he inherited, and another to laud the job he claims to have done cleaning it up.
Yeah.
Okay? So gone then was the wreckage, the ruin, and the dystopian American carnage, that's a quote, he deplored in the glowering speech at his inauguration. Instead, Trump offered a vision of hopefulness and light for a time. But those grace notes were soon overshadowed by an increasingly harsh tone, as though the president couldn't or didn't care to contain his more ad-libbed and aggressive self. Well, hello, that's who he is.
Yeah.
The thing is, if you speak for 15 minutes, maybe you can fool people. But if you can talk for an hour and a half, who you are, comes out.
Yes. And
LA Times notes, needle Democrats over the partial dismantling of the Affordable Care Act, except it's not going away because he's lying about that too, and people like it. One of his predecessors' proudest achievements. He resurrected the controversy over the national anthem and the dissent of kneeling black athletes because he's a racist who's playing to his racist base. There's no other reason for that. When he spoke of immigration, perhaps the touchiest issue facing a gridlock Congress, he placed it in a dark frame with talk of gang violence, alien intruders stealing jobs, and a suggestion of unending chain migrants, aunts, uncles, cousins, and other family members leeching taxpayer dollars. And the sisters of mercy are right. Anybody who's using chain migrants as a term has already bought into the BS and gaslighting that's going on about what's going on here. And by the way, it's not the wall, it's that. That's probably the most contentious thing that's preventing agreement on, what you do with immigration policy, followed by, and by the way, we want to get rid of half of them.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I've seen a lot of...
It's over the next 10 years by like 44%.
I've seen a lot of movement toward, warning people off of the term. I thought it was an odd choice anyway. I mean, it puts me in mind of the slave trade more than anything else. Chain migration, people who quote migrated here in chains. Yeah. But okay, whatever you want to do.
It's approximation to an olive branch. Trump said he would support a proposal offering a path to citizenship for 1.8 million children, so-called dreamers, who were brought to America illegally by their parents. That was, of course, talking about how everybody knows that immigrants are criminals.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
But only, he said, if Democrats would agree to a border wall and other changes in legal immigration they consider anathema. The border wall's fine. He can call it whatever he wants. It's not going to get built, and then we will tear it down. But other changes in legal immigration, they consider anathema. We consider anathema.
Yeah.
The result was groans and hisses and boos from that side of the House chamber. So that was really not well received.
I see.
Right? And as the article points out, the annual speech to Congress is one of Washington's most carefully choreographed set pieces. And for portions of it, Trump hewed closely to a familiar script. You keep saying things like strong and patriotism and flag and all that other stuff, that fine, that's supposed to be there. But no, it's a speech that didn't work. His uncompromising performance Tuesday perfectly encapsulated that approach. Supporters found much to like, and detractors plenty to reinforce the contempt. So I think that's a pretty good thing here. Jonathan Allen, writing for NBC, Trump talks unity, sows division in State of the Union. Again, these are not Trump as presidential things.
That's good.
Peter Baker's headline in his piece was "Trump can sell an improved economy, but not himself," and that's true. And Sahil Kapoor, writing in Bloomberg, says immigration fight shifts from Trump's wall to family green cards. Again, talking about the fact that the family reunification, which they call chain migration, is the big sticking point here.
Okay.
Okay. And then while this is going on, there's just this really, really interesting tweet. Jonathan Swan from Axios writes, a GOP source texts, as a Republican, I love how at the end of the day, after all their years of crap about identity politics, the Democrats picked a white dude from one of the most privileged families in America to do the response. To which Matt Iglesias said, this reaction to Joe Kennedy's speech is a good glimpse into how poorly equipped Republicans are to handle a diverse electorate and how fundamentally they misunderstand the relevant issues. In other words, they think it's all about optics when in fact it's all about substance. So that response from Joe Kennedy was fascinating in its own right for a variety of reasons.
Okay.
Norm Ornstein writes, I may be biased since I've gotten to know Representative Joe Kennedy, but he's giving the best State of the Union response I've heard, and he is the real deal, really. Now, it was funny because he did this in Fall River, and he did it in a small town in Massachusetts where he represents people. It was at a high school, a trade high school.
Okay.
And he did it with a crowd, which makes the speech much more effective.
Yes. I didn't see it, but that is definitely something I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, he was sincere and, came across as sincere and earnest. You know, you either are or you aren't, and he was able to project that. And he's a very good speaker. He perhaps didn't have enough pancake makeup on because both sides of his mouth were glistening.
I see.
So for those people who love to not talk about substance and only want to talk about optics, they had a lot to talk about. And, somebody actually wrote a little bit about that, which was very funny, and said, obviously, what happened is that Joe Kennedy misunderestimated the amount of time that Donald Trump would be speaking and overhydrated himself. And Joe Kennedy tweeted back, no kidding.
Oh, man, maybe true, huh?
So he's got a sense of humor, so that was pretty good. But Larry Sabato said, this one has the Kennedy magic all right. With more experience and polish, he'll be a contender one day. He's 37. He's not running in 2020. Part of the reason for the speech picking him is that they didn't want any of the 2020 contenders. They didn't want to play favorites.
I see. Yeah, that's a good point.
And yet, of course, that's going to anger people who want their favorites to be there. So they were tweeting, well, obviously tone deaf on the part of Democrats. That was actually a very good choice and a very good speech. Stu Rothenberg said Joe Kennedy has an impossible task because doing that Bobby Jindal, Marco Rubio, response kind of thing is really difficult. But Rothenberg said, Joe Kennedy has an impossible task, but he's doing well. He even speaks Spanish. He speaks fluent Spanish because he spent time in the Peace Corps.
That would be good. Yes.
So people were complaining, we don't like dynasties, and, we need new blood. Well, he's 37. No, not that new blood. We want some other new blood that I want, like some 80-year-old guy who I'm going to vote for, Like nobody is going to be happy with who you pick for the State of the Union response unless it's your person that you want to run in 2020.
Yes, and as you pointed out, I think the best point about that is you can't choose one.
Right, so you got to pick somebody else.
Right.
And that's who he was. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, release the memo thingy with Devin Nunes is still going on.
The Kraken, you're right.
And Trump advisors, I note, aren't the brightest bulbs in the ceiling. This is from a tweet by Mark Murray. All of this is what I've been reading. All the tweets and such are in the pundit roundup for today. Trump advisors say this. Trump, who trusts no one, or at least no one for long, has now decided that he must have an alternative strategy that does not involve having Justice Department officials fire Mueller. I think he's been convinced that firing Mueller would not only create a firestorm, it would play right into Mueller's hands at another friend, because it would give Mueller the moral high ground. Instead, as is now becoming plain, the Trump strategy is to discredit the investigation and the FBI That's where the release the Kraken memo comes from, without officially removing the leadership. And then this is highlighted by Mark Murray when he tweeted it. Trump is even talking to friends about the possibility of asking Attorney General Jeff Sessions to consider prosecuting Mueller and his team.
Yes.
Here's how it would work. We're sorry, Mr. Mueller. You won't be able to run the federal grand jury today because he has to go testify to another federal grand jury.
Yeah, that happens so often.
They think that that's going to work.
Yeah.
That's the amazing part. They think that that would work.
Well, they think a lot of things would work.
They think a lot of things would work. So, you scratch your head and go, okay, I think I'd rather be on Team Mueller. Of course, Rod Rosenstein is in the eye of the storm. Ben Wittes wrote that at Lawfare, Big Lies, Law Enforcement, and the Defense of Rod Rosenstein. In other words, to believe, as so many Trump defenders seem to, that there's something defective about the Mueller investigation, one has to believe not merely that the Obama administration conducted inappropriate surveillance against the Trump campaign, based on laundered opposition research from the Democratic National Committee, you also have to believe that the Trump administration itself is still doing it. You have to believe, or have to choose to believe, that Rod Rosenstein is a corrupt actor out to get the president. That belief is a political choice. It's a political choice to accept the big lie that the president and his defenders have been peddling for months about federal law enforcement and intelligence. So, they're still at it. And the whole, when you step back and try to scratch your head and say, what's going on here? It's just so bizarre. They got rid, Christopher Wray, who's the new director, got rid of Andrew McCabe, who is the acting director, and the deputy director, who was pretty much forced out. They deny it, but that's in fact what happened. And as it turns out, McCabe himself is under investigation by the Inspector General for how he handled the Clinton email investigation back in the day. And nobody even knows what that means. Is he being investigated because he was too light on her, or was he being investigated because he allowed it to leak out over the last 10 days of the election? Don't forget, as much as we are happy with James Comey investigating Donald Trump before he was fired, and that was a big firestorm.
Yeah.
We were unhappy with James Comey for all the stuff
still.
about Clinton at the end of the election.
Yes. Same thing on the other side, too, by the way. My favorite souvenir from the whole episode was the picture of the Republican conservative, the lone woman protesting outside the FBI building with a Comey resign sign that nobody knows now where she was. Was she a progressive protester? Was she a conservative protester? Who knows?
Right. So ginning up the fact that the Inspector General is going to look at this stuff. In fact, if there were any norms and traditions that were violated, it was Comey announcing that Clinton was under investigation at all.
Right.
It was Comey announcing that Clinton was under investigation, but not announcing that Trump was under investigation. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that led to, among other things, the results of the election. Is that what the Inspector General is looking at? Because what Andrew McCabe wanted to do is return to the norms of not having that stuff out there. Is that going easy on Clinton? Only in bizarro world.
Weird stuff.
So, sure. There's that floating out there.
I can't believe they...
And then there's the fact that Carter Page was under in surveillance because he was, suspected of trying to seek out Russian agents to talk to them. Now, the memo that Devin Nunes is supposedly highlighting, according to reports, because nobody's really seen it.
Highlighting, that sounded like that would be a great term for it.
We'll have to do that when we write it. The highlighting memo has to do with how the FISA court decided to look at Carter Page. But in fact, Andrea Mitchell reports it wasn't how the FISA court decided to look at Carter Page. It was how the FISA court renewed the look at Carter Page, who was already under surveillance because he was trying to contact Soviet federal, Russian agents. Not Soviet anymore. But, so in other words, Carter Page did stuff that made the FISA court say, yeah, we better look at him.
Yes.
And Devin Nunes is saying, well, that's all wrong because we're not telling you why, but just take my word for it.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then you scratch your head and say, okay, so what's the big deal there? Well, I don't understand how this is the biggest scandal since Watergate. What are we missing here? Well, it is, but I can't tell you what it is.
Yeah, right. The part I couldn't reveal.
So highlighting, I think, is exactly right.
Yeah. And I did see some mention of the fact that I guess he was asked directly in I don't know what setting, but I believe I guess in a committee meeting of some kind, of another committee member, Democrat, and I don't know if I can recall. Quigley is the name that comes to mind. I don't even know if that's the right person. Do we have a Quigley? I would ask him. Did you work on this memo? Did you receive any assistance on this memo or input on this memo from the White House? And repeatedly putting the question to him, and it became very clear in his avoidance of answering it that the answer is yes. Mm. So we'll just wait and find out. Just like it took 24 hours for Don Jr. to admit that the White House had written his statement about the Trump Tower meeting. Right. Hopefully it's just as fast we find out the truth about this one.
Well, I just think people named Quigley ought to be like referred to as captain or major. It ought to be right out of Catch
Down
22.
Under.
It's a perfect name.
Yeah.
Perfect name. Anyway, Paul Waldman tweets, maybe the craziest thing about the Nunes memo. Nunes? Did we ever settle that?
Yeah, I think we settled on Nunes.
Nunes memo is the apparent Republican belief that if they can just destroy the credibility of the visa warrant to surveil Carter Page, the entire Russia investigation will collapse.
I think that's the plan.
I think the whole thing they're trying to do, as our break comes up, is that we are supposed to believe that the Republicans hired Fusion GPS to do this dossier, and then the Democrats did. And because the Democrats paid for part of this, that everything that happened since then, therefore, doesn't count.
I do think that's the plan. I don't think it hangs together as a coherent narrative, but that won't stop them.
And that includes the FBI and everybody else. And the FBI is a hotbed of Hillary support. Just ask Rudy Giuliani. That's the part that I'm really scratching my head at. Is the Inspector General looking at how Rudy Giuliani got all these leaks? Is that what they're doing? Good for them. They should. Don't forget, James Comey was actually looking at that at the time he was fired.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. And in fact, we are back now with the Kagro in the Morning show. That was a terrific segment that we had. I don't know if any of you heard that, but President Obama called in and
we had a great time.
Amazing things
Thank
to
you,
say.
Mr. President.
Yeah,
I'm sorry you missed it because David said like the most funny thing he said all year, but he was on break.
I tried to save it. We were on a break. I didn't know it anyway. So we talked.
Anyway, we were talking about the fact that maybe the Inspector General is checking out why Rudy Giuliani got all these leaks. Maybe. And, did those leaks, were they anti-Trump? They were not. They were actually anti-Clinton. So trying to make the case that the FBI is a hotbed of pro-Clinton, anti-Trump sentiment is, let's just say, a hard sell.
Yeah, I would say so. By the way, if you want to check out, if you're the Inspector General and you want to know whether the FBI is a hotbed of pro-Clinton sentiment, go ahead, investigate Rudy Giuliani and see how long you keep your job.
Yeah, let's see. I mean, that would be good. Here's a really interesting contrarian piece.
Oh, I love those.
From Paul Rosenzweig in The Atlantic. Paul Rosenzweig helped to investigate Clinton back in the day, to give you an idea where he's coming from.
I see.
And the title is, There's No Way Mueller Will Indict Trump. And that's right at the end of the list I gave you, so you can find it easy.
Okay.
Those hoping the special counsel will prosecute the president are engaging in fantasy, and if it's too long and didn't read, it's tough to read on the air anyway, even if I hold it right up to the microphone. The whole idea here is that everybody in the Justice Department has already agreed that you can't indict a sitting president. So forget about it. Forget about it.
It's because I'm not there. I would tell them different.
Right?
Well, I might.
So, and then he writes, but what are the substance of the obstruction charge? Are pundits right that the case against Trump is becoming stronger, even if, as a legal matter, the president may not be charged? Again, color me skeptical, he says. Collateral cases like those involving obstruction and perjury are ones that involve derivative offenses, not the principal charges under investigation. Proving them often turns on proof of intent. You have to show that the defendant acted with the purpose of obstructing an investigation. Of course, Trump already told Lester Holt this, so I think this argument is kind of silly. This means that these cases tend to rise or fall in the strength of the case proving the underlying crime. It matters very much to juries and the public what we know exactly what it is that a defendant is covering up. If we don't think it matters that much, as in many Americans seem to concluded when confronted with President Clinton's sexual conduct, or that it hasn't been proven, then the cover-up is often forgiven. So he's making the point that, well, Trump didn't really do anything, so therefore you can't really make covering it up stick because there's nothing there.
I see.
Having trouble following that logic because I think there's going to be incredible Russian crime cartel money laundering stuff involved.
Yeah, I mean, color me skeptical now.
Especially based on all the, the people that Mueller's invited into his team. Yes. You know, when they choose up sides, he chose all the people who are good at money laundering investigation. So in the Trump investigation, he writes, we have yet to determine whether the campaign was involved in an underlying crime of electoral manipulation involving Russia. And that's probably the weaker argument if you're anti-Trump and you're hoping Mueller will nail him. It's not clear that how much they really were. They were trying, but whether they succeeded or not and, how much was actually there is unclear, I think it's fair to say. Mm-hmm. Much less how the broader American public thinks of it. Many, like me, see strong evidence of Russian interference in the American election and good evidence that some in the Trump campaign willingly accepted this and sought to take advantage of it, but candor compels the recognition that evidence of President Trump's personal involvement is much thinner than, say, that of his son-in-law or other campaign staff.
Yes.
That's fair. I think that's a fair statement.
Yes, and a good opportunity to discuss the weakness of the laws we have that control such things. I mean, it's okay. Well, the candidate didn't do it. So all you really need to do is impose a layer of plausible deniability and you can cheat all you want.
All of which brings us, he writes, to a final thought, admittedly far more speculative than what has gone before. Something concerns the president. That's clear. If it's not the alleged collusion with Russia, what is it? Well, I don't know. If he released his taxes, maybe we'd have a better idea.
That would help, possibly.
So he mentions, this author, that the president's finances have always been suspect. Some have thought them resting on shaky foundations.
Yes.
Ongoing investigations have looked to his banking and investments as well as those of his closest family. Uh-huh. But even here, one should not repose too much hope in the Mueller investigation. Mueller will not indict the president even for money laundering. The resolution of the current American crisis is going to be political, not criminal. The future lies with Congress, ultimately the electorate, not with prosecutors and the courts. I think in general that's also probably true.
Yes, that was called yesterday's show.
Yeah. So I think that's fair. I guess the question I have is the process here. Mueller does an investigation, comes to a conclusion, writes a report. What happens to that report?
Yeah, and nobody really knows, and it depends what they find, what it says, what they'd like to do with it, and also it will depend partly also.
Who sees it? Does this go to Ryan and McConnell? Does it go to the White House? Does it go to? I mean, obviously the White House will get to see it at some point. Does it go to Jeff Sessions and then he decides what to do with it? I don't know what the process is.
That is a good question. And in fact, I'm not entirely certain what the process is and or even where we would find it spelled out, if anywhere. I'm sure that in the paperwork establishing the investigation, we would find some answers. We'd have to kind of comb through that.
Yeah. So maybe I'll do a little investigative work, which is to say, ask somebody who knows, and try to report back tomorrow. But I think that's going to be part of it, because if Mueller laid out a strong case but didn't invite the president to be indicted, didn't indict the president, then a strong case laid out in the public will have tremendous value. And if nobody ever sees the report, that's a different story altogether.
Yes. Well, I don't think it will result in that. And Armando is, I guess, combing. Yeah. Well, what Armando is, I guess, combing through the documentation that we would need to answer the question, and I guess it's made plain there, in his view, that Mueller decides on the distribution of his report. It may very well be the case. I would say this article serves as a pretty good warning that, one, there will be an argument made for essentially just wrapping up the investigation and laying it out there and saying, well, that's what I found and that's all there is to it. And I've suggested in the past the history of such investigations, no matter whether they're conducted by independent counsels, special prosecutors, conducted in Congress, wherever, they tend to land with a soft thud and simply be passed on, or people shrug their shoulders and say, well, it's a political question, or the election's coming up and we don't want to affect the outcome of it somehow, which is an amazing conclusion to draw. But this very frequently is the way these things end. And if you search your own memory, you'll find that, how did Iran-Contra end? Well, time's up and we're getting a new president anyway, so forget it, or however you express it. But these things do tend to sort of fade away. Of course, if he comes up with some sort of explosive conclusion, it may be the case that it's unavoidable, but it also may be the case that come indictment time, Mueller, for whatever reason, believes, the prosecution of this case really needs to be up to someone else, or he may grab it for himself and say, I'm seeing this through to a conclusion. But I guess what's expressed in this article is certainly something to worry about, and it'll certainly be the Republican, I guess we can predict already, it'll be the Republican response that, yeah, that's all very nice, but it needs to be settled at the ballot box.
Okay.
And that'll be it.
Coming. I'm good with that.
Oh, well, that will be disappointing for me, but okay.
No, I think that, it is a good point, and we do have to keep in mind that what is not going to happen is that Louise Mensch, Marshal of the Supreme Court, coming into the White House and frog marching him out. I mean, that's, it's good to keep that in mind. It can end with a big bang, like, with Ken Starr. It can end quietly, as you point out. But so much of what they're doing has already been made public about the Russia stuff that half the population happens to think that Trump was involved in trying to work with the Russians to steer the election, even if that ultimately was not the reason why he was elected. What is unclear is what happens with Trump's finances. Do his taxes get forced out into the open and that sort of thing? And that's the fascinating part of all of that. Meanwhile, while that's all in the background so that people don't, just count and put all their apples in the Mueller basket, Brian Beutler writes at Crooked, the Republican plan for Trump impunity. The question of whether these Republicans are greasing the skids, with the release the Kraken memo, for example, the question of whether these Republicans are greasing the skids for Trump to fire Mueller, or trying to hobble his efforts, or merely helping to discredit his investigation is a matter of intense speculation. Which one of those three things is it? But it seems much more likely that what they're really doing is creating latitude in each of these directions simultaneously so that one way or the other, Trump never faces accountability for any crimes he has committed. I would add, don't forget, they're as confused as we are. They don't know what Mueller has. They don't know what Mueller's going to do. They don't know what Mueller's going to release. And they don't know what the effects of that's going to be. So they're trying to cover their bases in all directions and say, whatever happens, we have a plan for it, because we don't really have a plan specifically. We just have a generic muddy the water plan.
Well, I'm certain that that's the only plan they have.
Yes. It's been lost to the ages of the past several months, But amid the tremendous backlash to Trump's decision to fire FBI Director James Comey last year, and yes, it's a good reminder, that did not go well with the public, Republicans were relieved to learn that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein had selected Mueller as a special counsel and claimed to be committed to protecting the integrity of his investigation. If their praise for the Mueller appointment had been sincere, which of course it wasn't, it would have prefigured a pattern of behavior wildly at odds from the one we've witnessed since last June. As Trump's exposure has grown, and it has, Republicans have carved out a berth of impunity around him large enough to steer him through the biggest scandal in American political history. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say that this might well be the biggest scandal in American political history, depending upon what comes out of it. We have a crook in the White House who's enriching himself at the expense of the rest of the country, who is a crook who is money laundering Russian funds and then fighting tooth and nail to prevent that from being shown. And that's got nothing to do with the collusion issue, which is really a conspiracy issue because legally there's no such thing as collusion, I've been taught.
Yes, that does come up from time to time.
So with all of that, Washington Post published a useful guide. I think Philip Bump put it together. No, David Fahrenthold put it together. 9 questions about President Trump's businesses and possible conflicts of interest. Again, a sobering, let's go with what we really know. Let me give you that because I thought it was really pretty good.
Okay, I did see it fly across the screen yesterday and put it away. But yeah, let's take that.
Right, and I'll just give you the last one, number 9. You can look at some of the others. But I liked number 9. Number 9, has President Trump released his tax returns? No.
Okay.
Would he be able to answer all of these questions more clearly if he did? Yes.
Possibly. Yeah.
So there's your abbreviated, what it says about President Trump's businesses and possible conflicts of interest.
Yes.
Okay. So we have all of that. I think that the State of the Union is history. It's gone. I don't know that anybody's going to talk about it too much more because, it's over and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, people can't remember very much of it either.
What they are going to talk about is the ongoing Trump-Russia investigation, what they're going to do with Rod Rosenstein, what's going to happen with the release of the Kraken memo, and that's what's next.
I guess that will probably occupy our time.
Right. Here's an interesting one. And plus what happens with immigration. Josh Marshall writes that there's a story in CNN. Trump's lawyer set high bar for Mueller chat. Trump's attorneys are arguing that Robert Mueller's team has not met the high threshold they believe is needed to interview a president in person. And Josh Marshall says this is actually a thing that doesn't exist.
Okay, yeah.
There's no bar.
Right.
There's no,
right.
You have to. There's no threshold.
You haven't met the threshold.
That's like a made-up concept there.
Right. Well, yeah, pretty much. If
he doesn't go, then Mueller can subpoena him.
Yes. Well, they're right. There's no such thing. There's no test or anything like that. They make it out like there are rules for when a special prosecutor is allowed to interview the president, and there are not. There's legal precedent around whether or not the president is allowed to say no because national security, or no because I'm very busy, or no because this doesn't bear on anything, or no at all because you can't tell the executive branch what to do, and I'm the unitary executive branch. That is all there, but there's no threshold for asking.
Right. It's just a silly thing that they make up and say, I just made up a new thing. I've decided you haven't met the threshold for me to actually talk to you.
Yeah, I mean, the only bar I can think of that is out there is, can I challenge your subpoena? And you can always do that.
You can always do that.
But
yep. Anyway, so while all this is happening, what's happening in the real world, let me give you a couple of stories just to give you an idea. This is from Axios. Corporate world prepares for chaos if DACA isn't renewed, because they have to scramble to know what to do about it. And we talked a little bit at the beginning of the show through his State of the Union speech, the difficulties in trying to solve this, especially when it comes to family reunification and the hardline good lot, the Vente Latte proposal to basically cut legal immigration in half, which Democrats are not going for. And there's North Korea out there. He was a little warlike with his North Korea stuff. And then at the same time, CNN reports ambassador candidate dropped over stark warning on North Korea. A former candidate to be the Trump administration's ambassador to South Korea, reminder, he doesn't have one, has issued a direct challenge to the White House over its consideration of a preemptive strike against North Korea. Cha, his name, Victor Cha, a widely respected former academic and former Bush administration official, said in a Washington Post op-ed on Monday that the answer to the real and unprecedented threats North Korea presents is not, as some Trump administration officials have suggested, a preventative military strike. Instead, Cha laid out what he called a forcible military option available that can address the threat without escalating into a war that would likely kill tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Americans. Well, that would be nice if tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Americans didn't die in a war.
I think that would be great. I did not realize that his last name was Cha. The way you said it, it sounded like, I don't know, like Wayne's World's response to, well, we shouldn't contemplate a bloody nose strike against North Korea. Cha, right?
Yeah, well, so he is not therefore nominated.
Oh, wow.
Daniel Larison, writing in the American Conservative, has an interesting observation. The bad faith opposition to the nuclear deal with Iran. The UAE's foreign minister was complaining about it because it didn't solve all the problems of the region. And Daniel Larison, conservative, writes, like almost all other critics of the nuclear deal, the Emirati minister won't be satisfied by any agreement that Iran might actually accept. Which is a nice observation for a conservative to make, because it's true.
Yes, yeah. I think that's right. Why did he say that?
Because he's pretty reasonable about not wanting to go to war about everything. He's not a neocon.
All right. Well, yeah, war. That sucks.
Right? And then the last thing I'll give you, this was just kind of fun. It was a review in the Washington Times.
Okay.
Of David Frum book.
Oh, yes.
Trumpocracy, The Corruption of the American Republic by David Frum.
Sure.
And this conservative outlet with a conservative writer didn't like David Frum's review and spent the entire time of the review berating David Frum.
Is the Washington Times still Korean owned?
I think maybe.
Just curious. And there's a follow-up.
Unification Church owned, that kind of thing. Yeah, I think maybe. Anyway, so...
That's weird.
Yeah, I know it is, but my observation about it is the Washington Times basically says to David Frum, "I'm going to give you a careful, reasoned, nonpartisan, and thoughtful review of your stupid book."
I guess that's why people who love the Washington Times love the Washington Times.
Right, because David Frum, remember David Frum, you useless piece of crap who got fired from one job to the other, wrote a book. I'll get to the book in a minute, but let me tell you about David Frum first. That's why it was so funny to read the review. So it was basically entirely ad hominems, and if you like that kind of thing, it's really a fun piece.
Yes. No, we reject ad hominem. Something. That's, I like it. But all right.
Anyway. All right. Anything else I want to tell you about before I go? Presidential job approval is 4 times as powerful as economic growth in determining midterm election outcomes, says Emory's Alan Abramowitz. Trump is the least popular first-term president in polling history, so I'm sure things are going to go well.
It's a record.
It's a record, yes. The piece here from Catherine Rampell. Trump's immigration compromise is a trick. Democrats shouldn't fall for it. It isn't a quid pro quo. It's just quid. What else here? Ian Millhauser with the observation, Trump's single greatest ally in 2016 was the fact that nearly no one in the press thought he could win. It led Trump to being covered as an entertaining diversion and Clinton being covered as a scalp that would make the career of any reporter able to cut it off. So we'll see if we do better in terms of covering Trump at this point.
Yes, I did see that tweeted. That was actually a response, I think, to Kellyanne Conway insisting.
Yes, who had said everybody who said Donald Trump couldn't win, every screaming headline, every wrong poll, every anchor, every pundit who said this is over, it's a joke, he can't win, tried to interfere in the election. That's the real racist.
Yeah. Well, an interesting. Well, no, a stupid spin, as usual, from Kellyanne Conway, and a good response from Ian.
Jack Kimball, who is a fake representative who tweets and is very funny sometimes, had a tweet last night during the State of the Union. He said, Melania looked at Trump the way Mike Pence looks at the cast of La Cage aux Folles.
That's an interesting observation.
I thought that was pretty funny.
Yes, I understand she arrived separately.
Wearing winter white.
Was she? Really? Okay. Well, good. I think challenging the fashion mythology of the country. Do they usually? Do the first ladies not usually arrive separately? I mean, I could see why
I don't know. They just they touted the whole idea that the whole family would be there.
Yes, I mean, I guess
I think she's still mad at him over that Stormy Daniels thing.
Possibly. I don't know.
Possibly.
I don't know what their arrangement is.
I'll have to
I would think though the president would get there
early.
early.
Access Hollywood to see what really happened.
Yeah, well, we'll find out. He'll blurt it out somewhere.
Bloomberg has an analysis where they say all signs point to a big Democratic win in 2018. I don't know if you heard that, but that's still going on. And while this is going on, here's a tweet about Senator Toast. This is from Kevin Robillard. Senator Dean Heller raised $820,000 in quarter four. Cash on hand is essentially unchanged from the end of September.
I see. Yeah, you're used to seeing the million.
Right.
Millions? That one.
$820 million. That's $820,000?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just $820. I don't know. But people don't seem to be rallying around Dean Heller.
Well,
confusion of money when the time comes from the Cubs and from the Steve Winns of the world.
There's very little money floating around in his state, so people have difficulty accessing cash.
Yeah, I'm shocked to find out that cash is actually being used in these casinos.
Well,
Sheldon.
Okay.
We need you.
Yep.
No, we got to make you sweat first. So.
I did read somewhere the other day that Steve Wynn, I guess, is the most frequent dining partner to date at the White House. He's been to dinner with Trump 5 times, and that was just over a course of 2 days. By the way, he says he'd like to sit down and eat a bit. Donald Trump does, but 5 times at dinner. Steve Wynn, who knew? But gee whiz, finance director at the RNC. That makes some sense, but
it does. And Trump likes to make Wynn beg for dessert.
Yeah,
that's the whole relationship. They hate each other. They've always hated each other.
I can believe that.
They fight over casinos all the time, and Trump loves to have Wynn around the way he liked to invite Romney to be, Secretary of State for the same reasons.
That could be it. That could certainly be it.
Chris Christie used to fill that role, but now he's on ABC. So
is Steve Wynn? I'm just as you said that, I wondered, is Steve Wynn? It probably is. I mean, he controls so much of the state between him and Adelson. Is he the reason Trump has a hotel but not a casino in Las Vegas? The only place that doesn't have a casino in it is Trump Hotel.
So I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, I bet he spiked his casino license at some point.
In
so
any
he invites
case,
him over for one scoop.
Regardless, that is my state of the Kagro in the Morning Nation for today. So I'm done. The rebuttal,
crowd applause
you are welcome to, for the next hour. And Joan will be on, so she'll tell you what really happened last night.
Okay.
But thanks so much for listening. I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll do it again.
Okay. Let's have Trump do a State of the Union again, and then we'll make more fun of it.
Thank you, President Obama, for calling in on the break, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay. Thanks, Greg. Now is the segment of the show that we give over to Why You Are Wrong before Joan shows up and helps us change the subject. There was, of course, chatter in the background from Armando, who I think has made some good points. It would have been a lot easier if Skype made it simpler and Greg had more time. It would have been interesting, I think, to try and engineer one more time the 3-way call. But let's say this: I think the most salient point to extract from the objections, and it is difficult to try and process them in real time as Greg is reading to us from the article. But I think good point being made here, which I think a lot of you probably grasped, like Armando did right at the outset, that the initial premise of the article, which we were reading, where were we attributing it? I tried several times to try and get the Atlantic to just display it for me, but the Atlantic website believes I have a web ad blocker enabled on their site, which I do not. As many sites now are wise to the ad blockers and say, I'm not going to show you this article unless you turn off your ad blocker. But once they've decided you have an ad blocker on, there's no way of convincing that site that you've turned it off, even if you have. Reloading it, nothing. So big thanks to the programmers working on the Atlantic website for blocking my access to the Atlantic's content, but only partially, because, of course, if I put the article in Pocket, I can go read it in Pocket View. So you're actually not doing anything in terms of enhancing your revenues by displaying ads to me, because you continue to refuse to display those ads to me, and I just read it ad-free in Pocket because it's the only way. I actually agreed to your terms and said I'll disable my ad blocker and allow you to serve those ads to me and make revenue, but you refuse to take yes for an answer, Atlantic, and you're going to have to look into that. But I wanted to refresh it and use the few seconds they give us to look at it. Yes, it was Paul Rosenzweig was the name of the author of the article, and the big problem here is that there's a lot going on in the article, and there's some probably intentional confusion going on between the headline's point, which is political in nature. There's no way Mueller will indict Trump, and that, I think, rests on political premises and is a political conclusion. Maybe the most likely conclusion in the end, because the politics weighs the heaviest in all this, but the initial assertion out of the box right after the headline, our lead, as I recall, let's grab it here, was the latest revelations about the president, etc., have excited public interest, but unlikely, or leading to speculation that Mueller may have amassed sufficient evidence, etc. But then the assertion that the conclusion inside the Justice Department is that there is no ability to indict the president, and that all the lawyers there believe that that's the case, and so therefore. And that part is inapposite and maybe not even true. It's possible that the vast majority of Justice Department attorneys like to use that as a rule of thumb, but I don't know. I've met a few of the top-level Department of Justice attorneys, and they very rarely let things rest on rules of thumb, and they are adept. In fact, they are in their jobs because they are able to work around rules of thumb or redefine rules of thumb when necessary. So perhaps we'll explore a little bit more of this after this break. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. As it happens, Armando not actually available today to discuss his points, but I think we can probably cover the major objections that he had just for a few minutes before we begin turning the corner on this and speaking to Joan about her harrowing experience working to keep the front page updated during the State of the Union address and catching up on much, much more. Perhaps tomorrow. We will see what his availability is, but I think we've relayed the key points. There was another, of course, that he passed on, that the prosecution of whatever Mueller's conclusion is, but especially, I think it would be especially, I was going to say especially clear, but nothing's especially clear. But it would be certainly an easier argument to make if the bulk of Mueller's conclusions are about money laundering as opposed to election interference. The case for prosecuting would be hopefully clearer, probably stronger. And at that point, I think you'd find in an honest Justice Department staffed with non-political professionals anyway. And we do still, despite the purges and political appointments, etc., still have that inside of the Justice Department. And, of course, Mueller having picked his own team, we can be pretty sure that they have their own views of these things. A money laundering issue would be, how do you settle a money laundering issue at the ballot box? I mean, to simply say, well, the president... the allegations are that the president has systematically broken the criminal codes for years and has amassed a fortune that enabled him to run for president in the first place. But leaving aside the politics, money laundering is money laundering. The fact that you did it and a special prosecutor thinks they have a solid case against you is not the sort of thing that you ordinarily say, well, it's a political question. But just because the person is political doesn't mean that you don't prosecute it, or that you say, you throw your hands up and say, this can't be settled. Now, a question of interference in, or collusion and interference in the election itself comes much closer to being a political question. I mean, unless you get sort of smoking guns that lead you to say, well, and you would know this in the report, that would be spelled out quite clearly, yeah, there was interference, but it rose to the level of espionage, and so therefore we want to indict on those grounds. That would be quite different. But if it's really just comes down to a question of, well, the Russians certainly made themselves available for good reasons from their own point of view to assist the campaign, and the campaign was happy to accept that assistance, but it was all, rather public in nature. That is to say, the Russians, like Russian bots and Russian manipulation on Facebook, etc., by itself, it wouldn't necessarily be something that you could indict the Trump campaign or Donald Trump himself or even any of the underlings necessarily for. Just saying, well, I don't know, there's for some reason the Russian bots are out there floating these theories that are extraordinarily exciting to our base, and we're just happy that they're doing it. If that's really all you could come up with, then I don't know, that you're really going to make it, certainly not to the level of indictment. Of course, a question of impeachment, I guess you could do whatever the hell you want. It wouldn't really matter one way or the other. And it's whatever the House says they want to impeach you for. Of course, this House wouldn't do it anyway, so I guess it's pretty much out of the question. But I don't know if that cleared things up. But if the bulk of the case rested on something that's a crime quite clearly, all by itself, absent any political considerations, it would be much more difficult to dismiss as a political question, and I think that would be a false premise for Rosenzweig to rest on at that point. If the question is solely about Russian influence in the election, that's a much more ticklish issue and certainly easier to put inside the political question box. In other words, but there's good argument, against it as well. I should point that out too. But the argument for his position, if the case were solely about election interference, might very well be, look, an alternative viewpoint was laid out for the American voting public, and the fact that they bought it, sad, lamentable, perhaps. Maybe, this is one of the big problems with it, is you might actually be able to make a case that there's serious illegality involved in that. But ultimately, they made their own decision and they cast their ballot. And if you don't like the way they did it, there's a great way to reject it. Remove the man from office at the end of his term and replace him with someone else. There's lots of problems with that, and it's an awfully blunt instrument. And, of course, once again, just reiterating from yesterday's show, the ultimate outcome is it wouldn't be a problem if the Russians did it again. It's only a problem, per se, if the American people voting their conscience, such as that may be, decide to accept either Trump again or some other candidate also manipulated by interference, also guided into office by interference from the Russians. But if Americans decide, I guess the big problem with that political question is, one, broadly speaking, and beyond the scope of law, it opens up the question of, are you saying that if Americans wanted to at the ballot box, they could vote for a complete open political union with Russia, a merger with Russia? Could we do that? I suggest that simply electing one president after another on the basis of Russian influence of our campaigns would not be sufficient to ratify such a political union. and there would still be material there to investigate. Yes, that would be a problem. Secondly, I guess I would say that another difficulty with simply dismissing it as a political question, the idea of campaign interference, is, well, we do have statutory authority to lean on here. It is codified in the U.S. Criminal Code that it is illegal to accept foreign campaign donations, and I guess it's not even really a criminal violation, is that we usually treat it as a civil violation. But foreign campaign donations are illegal, and they are presumably, and again, here I'm only speaking in terms of legal and judicial canons, they are presumably illegal for good reason. I guess you could, if you really wanted to have a big fight about whether or not the reason is particularly good. But presumably the idea is, well, we really only want Americans deciding this question of whether or not either we accept interference or we want Russian guidance and all of this stuff. And, that I think has been an underlying assumption of everything we've done for the entire history of the country. But I guess we could change that. But to the extent that we've decided to codify the requirement that Americans and Americans only, A, cast ballots, and B, finance campaigns, well, to the extent that there's been serious Russian collusion, and to the extent to which we have believed to this point that all sorts of contributions towards the election of one candidate or another, not just monetary contributions, but in-kind donations, we have a statutory framework for turning advice and other benefits that could help a campaign along into putting them on a par with money and monetary contributions, well, then you're going to have real difficulty sitting there and explaining why having Russia guide a presidential campaign isn't a problem or is a political question that has to be settled at the ballot box. If it was just money coming in a suitcase and Vladimir Putin carrying it here by himself and on television waving to the crowd as he hands over a case of money to Donald Trump, or I guess to keep things consistent with Rosenzweig's argument, some underling rather than Donald Trump. And Donald Trump can look in the other direction and say, I don't know what's going on. And we see all of that on television. If that's not a problem, then Rosenzweig's right. If it is a problem, then he's kidding you. And you should keep that in mind. I think we actually may have covered that pretty well. I don't know. We'll get reviews on that from Armando tomorrow, perhaps. In the meantime, Joan McCarter has called in. You heard the wonderful music and then the patient silence as I rambled on. Good morning, Joan. How are you?
Good morning. I am fine.
Good.
Mostly recovered.
Good. Okay. Mostly. Good enough. You had, of course, you were on duty yesterday, and having to sit around and actually watch things. I feel so bad.
Actually, have to listen to things, which was a challenge.
Yeah.
I don't know if you read any of my life blogging. I had a hard time.
In passing, I actually just did not get a chance to even sit down and even do my usual Twitter watching of the State of the Union or major speeches, but I was only able to check and see, I see your name attached to the live blogging and the pictures that are being chosen. These are fun too.
Barb's great at picking pictures.
Yeah. Well, at least you get to team up. They don't just make you do the whole thing. That must have been tough.
It was a full team effort last night. It was a challenge.
Yeah.
At one point, I completely lost any ability to just objectively listen and respond. The Americans are dreamers 2 line.
Yeah.
Kind of sent me over the edge.
Right. So he needed to appropriate that for himself. And he's done this before. I understand that's a clever play, but it's also very obvious, I think, to most people what he's trying to do. But there's certainly a
David Duke and Richard Spencer loved it.
They seem
about
to.
their appreciation for that line.
Yes, and that's a good indication of what's going on when the Nazis chime in. Oh, that was fantastic. When they're applauding the State of the Union, one has to imagine that let's say Adolf Hitler would probably have sat on his hands through most of Roosevelt's State of the Union. I am very disappointed in this State of the Union speech. I will not applaud it. Whereas here, this time the Nazis really seem to like it. So, we are unifying something. He is correct and all of that. So he's called for unity, and we're fully in agreement with the Nazis.
Yeah, he didn't call for unity. The people who are writing those headlines did not listen to the same speech most of us listened to last night.
Oh, yes, that's true. And I did see that there was some correction as between last night and the morning, and also some good critiques. But I started my day in reviewing the photos of early headlines that Greg had sent.
Yes.
And did the text of the speech do that? Call for unity, or seem to call for unity, or was that maybe a press release ahead of the speech?
He used the word bipartisan a couple of times.
Okay. Did he use it correctly?
And that was good enough.
Okay.
He also set out his 4 pillars for his immigration plan and said that's the only thing he's going to agree to.
I see.
Which, so much for bipartisanship.
Right.
Sure, we all get in a room and we agree to do what I want to do, which is...
Well, that is bipartisan. You agree, and I propose you agree. I'm a party, you're a party to the agreement. Bipartisanship. I'm not sure he knows what it means. He's used it wrong in the past. I assume the speechwriters wrote him a correct sentence, but I like when he says stuff like, let's do a bipartisan.
Yeah, let's do a bipartisan.
What?
There was a great deal of sniffing again last night.
Okay. Good.
And quite a bit of slurring, but more sniffing than slurring this time.
Well, good. I mean, yeah, you know what? I mean, I think I think he gets winded doing anything, and then his nasal passages swell, and he can't get enough oxygen.
I think that's probably correct.
Yeah. Well,
the thing that was most irritating, it was unrelated to most of it, except it's such a telling thing about Donald Trump. He clapped for himself continuously. Every applause line, he clapped for himself.
Yeah, that is really something. I don't know why he doesn't understand that that's weird, but yeah, there's a lot of things he doesn't understand. The boundaries between himself and women, whatever.
Yeah.
So, not surprising.
At the Dreamers Are Americans 2 point, or Americans Are Dreamers 2 point, I actually had to step away from the keyboard for a few minutes.
All right, well, you're allowed.
But then he started talking about the sequester, and that brought me back.
Oh.
Because 10-1, Donald Trump does not know what a sequester is.
Yeah. Didn't he have trouble pronouncing it correctly at one point in the campaign? I can't recall offhand. Do you remember that? Okay. I'm not crazy.
No, you're not
because of
crazy.
This. That's not the reason.
He knows that he can't have the most beautiful, great military in the world because of the sequester. So, no idea what it means. He just can't have something because of it. So it was in the speech.
All right. Well, that's he said sequester, right? Was that it? Or?
Yeah.
Did he get it right last night?
He got it right last night.
All right, a little coaching. That is good. Well, it probably sucked in many other ways. But I'm sorry to hear you had to walk away. I can imagine at that point, saying, "Oh my God, all right, I need to take a walk."
I was getting a little too profane. So,
all right.
And Marcos is fine with that on the front page, but it was hampering my ability to follow along with the rest of the speech.
Yes, well, you don't have to be, obviously for us, you don't have to, be above the fray and whatnot. But yeah, there are times that you recognize, okay, I'm not doing anybody any good here. I need 5 minutes, collect my thoughts,
or my own blood pressure.
Yeah, right. That might be. It's not that I'll do a disservice to others because they're all cursing too. It's just I don't want anybody else to have this blood pressure problem. That's very kind of you.
So we got through it.
Good. I am glad to hear that.
We got through it without talking about the FBI. Everybody else in law enforcement, particularly Border Patrol and ICE. He loves those guys that left the FBI out of his accolades last night.
Yes, not surprising, but better that he leave them out than try to fake it, I guess. Although it might have been nice to apologize to them a little bit, but he doesn't do that.
He doesn't do that.
That's just out of the question. What about, let's see, what about the response? I now wish I had seen this because my initial thoughts on the response issue of who was going to deliver it, I'm usually, I believe, it doesn't make a difference, for the most part, who delivers it. And it's an impossible task because the setting of the State of the Union is so iconic. And, of course, you don't have the opportunity to use that same setting. Honestly, a real response would be, okay, he's done. Now the responder gets up and gives his speech from the rostrum of the House. But, of course, that's never going to happen. So really, no matter what you choose, it's always the sound and the visuals and the lack of a crowd to respond in the same way makes it a weak response. But I guess they tried something a little different.
They tried something different, and it was very effective. It was the perfect counterpoint, in fact. It was Joe Kennedy III standing before a crowd of folks at a vocational high school.
Okay.
And it was very effective. He was very effective. He is a true Kennedy.
Oh, all right. It's been a while.
And it was very impressive. It was a very good speech. It was a great speech. It was a fantastic point-by-point counterpoint to Trump. And probably the best State of the Union response I've seen in a long time.
Well, that's good. I mean, well, of course, the last couple State of the Union responses would have been lying crap responses to Obama, but still,
right.
Even going
back. Remember Kenneth the Page? Bobby Jindal?
Yes, okay, all right.
I like that one best for totally different reasons.
That was a fun one. That was the volcano monitoring critique, I recall, and the volcano exploded.
Rubio. I don't remember anything of Rubio's except for the water.
Yeah, that's true. That he became famous for that one. But responses are difficult to do, and then, of course, they made a mockery of the response thing by having 8 different, internet-only responses, etc. I had a question for you about the. Did anybody check out the stream that I guess was it the Trump campaign was putting out with the contributors' names?
The telethon?
Yeah.
We weren't watching that one.
Okay.
No.
Well, cause I'm curious about whether they were using the same feed, and I don't know that there is any other feed of live footage from the floor. And I guess if they were using some other feed, that would be a problem all by itself. But I've been curious.
They had to be using the official feed from the floor to be able to do that. Yeah.
As I was pondering yesterday, I mean, isn't that sort of in violation of House rules pretty directly? The use of official floor footage for campaign purposes is pretty explicitly forbidden in the ethics rules and House standing rules. And I don't know whether the FEC has anything about it, but just pointing out. But of course,
I think the problem is you'd have to have a House Speaker that cared.
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
But perhaps Democrats could make something out of it.
I would think so, but I don't know. So far, nobody has shown any interest in it. But maybe it was
perhaps someone who knows this stuff really well could write about it at Daily Kos.
I think that would be almost impossible. I don't know how you could get that done. Yeah, I suppose I ought to bring that up, but it kind of occurred to me the day before the speech, and then I was like, well, we're not going to get them to stop doing this.
I think it would be important follow-up, actually, and help us with our ongoing effort to put Paul Ryan in the middle of this mess.
Yeah.
And in fact, this morning I found myself retweeting Joe Scarborough, of all things.
That is hard to believe. What did he say?
Yes, on Paul Ryan.
Okay.
Even after 4 arrests of top Trump officials, he tweets, Paul Ryan is allowing his party to investigate the investigators instead of Russia. Obstruction of justice is now a party plank for the House Republicans.
Yes.
And it has been for quite a while.
True. Yeah.
So it's important that we don't let Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell get away with this. That we put them in the middle of all of this as well, because they're not just enabling it, they're encouraging it.
That's true. I mean, they went out of their way to make sure that we didn't hear about it in time to actually do anything about it, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was reminding myself yesterday, as we're watching all of this, there was a recorded conversation at some point in which Paul Ryan says, yes, I know you think that Vladimir Putin pays Donald Trump, but please don't say anything, or else Republicans won't be able to get all the good stuff that they want by winning the election. So let's all
say
agree
it
to keep
outside of this room. No leaks.
Right.
This is how we know we're a family.
Right, which is an astonishing thing to find yourself recorded saying, I must say. Did we ever learn, like, why that was recorded and by whom?
No.
I don't.
And if we have, it was. No, I've never seen anybody.
I don't know if I even asked that.
Cop to recording it and leaking it.
I feel like I might have asked that question at the time, like, why did you record that? Who did it? And then forgot to get an answer.
Yeah, because it sounded like it was just members. It was just leadership. I didn't get the impression that there was any staff present.
I wonder if I'll have
to
look into that.
Maybe one of the members left their phone on recording, and a staff member heard it. I have no idea how it came to light.
And then stole the phone or something. I don't even know how that. Well, okay, another assignment. I'd like to see if anybody wrote anything about that.
Thank you. You're a patriot.
I don't know. That's a weird thing. I'll have to look back. Maybe the original article had some note about that, but
it did not. I looked back yesterday. I wrote about it again yesterday, and I'm going to write about it again today. I'm going to keep writing about it because I hate Paul Ryan.
Well, why not? I think that's a good point. And one that we tend to forget. I mean, it's another one of those things. Yesterday's show was very much about this sort of thing. Like, again, don't we get the feeling, as Catherine Miller, of all people also, I'm listening to very weird people these days and finding myself in agreement with it, writing, it's one of those things that, hey, shouldn't something have happened about that, where the Republican House leadership says, I think Putin pays Trump. Nervous laughter follows. Hey, seriously though, don't tell anybody. Yeah. That's on tape, and not even in the top 20 of issues with these guys. I mean, it would be in the top 20 for Kevin McCarthy issues, or even Paul Ryan issues, maybe. But as far as the Trump scandals go, it's just not on anybody's radar. That's how bad we are. How bad he is, and how bad we are at making big deals out of things because we don't have any mechanism for doing it. Because, I don't know, we wrote all our laws like, we'll probably have pretty honest people as politicians. And that's not working out.
Not working out so well. No.
So, what else is new?
What else is new? Well, I'm still a little fixated on Paul Ryan, but I will do my best to get over it.
That's a good topic too, though. Certainly, if you have something you want to add,
there are other things. We've got Mark on the Russia beat as always, and the memo beat because he's really good at remembering all of these things. He's very good at remembering these things.
Yes,
he's developed a huge timeline.
Okay,
which helps him.
Oh,
but
really?
So read about the memo from Mark.
Okay.
I'll pick up the little bit that's Paul Ryan on the memo and Paul Ryan's willingness to release this and his refusal to also release the Democratic memo in response. And also his willingness to talk to anybody about it and his efforts to shut the press up when they ask him.
All right, yeah, I'd like to follow up on that. We're going to take our 2-minute break in just a few seconds, but then I can use that time to pull up Mark's writing about that. Georgia had a very good point the other day on Twitter. I don't even know why why we're calling it a memo. It's just a list of Republican talking points. A memo actually, makes it sound like it's something official, but we'll perhaps chat about that after the break.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio. Joan McCarter is still with us. Thankfully, you haven't given up, either jumped out a window or gone back to sleep. It was a tough night, I'm sure.
It was a tough night, foretold by the super blue blood moon.
Yes.
Which I didn't get to see this morning because it's very cloudy here. Did you get to see it?
No, it was, we only had it, I think, visible for a few minutes, and apparently I thought about it, and they said on the East Coast the moon sets before the peak of the eclipse part of it anyway, so you'll see a brief, if you wake up really early and go out in the really cold weather, and you might be able to see out of, if you get up on top of a hill, a little bit of the moon get a little shady looking, and then it disappears, so it wasn't worth it.
Well, that's unfortunate because we had full totality here, but I didn't get to see it anyway because it was too cloudy.
Well, that is also unfortunate.
Yes.
These astronomical things not really working out. Okay, well, we'll try again in 2037. I think that's the next one, something like that. I'm disappointed to find out, but I'm setting my alarm for early 2037. Definitely going to get up.
That's not that far away.
No.
20 years, we can do that if we're still here.
Sure. We'll be, you're right.
We didn't declare war last night, so, we got that going for us.
Okay. Well, I think probably by that stage, we can maybe move the show earlier. At that stage of my life, I'll be getting up at 5 in the morning and stuff like that. So it might work.
We can do it in real time. We can watch the eclipse in real time. It's a date.
Okay. And it'll be exciting too. This is it. This is finally here. I don't know if my voice will be deteriorated that much by that point, but that's how I plan to do it. Okay. So other than the moon, which it's a disappointment that you weren't able to peek in on that one, but there are many disappointments this morning.
There are many disappointments this morning. You wake up and you're still in Donald Trump's America, and that's just
problematic. I understand.
Even worse, you're in Idaho.
Well,
where
I didn't want to be the one to say
it. Once again,
but
we are embarking upon a unconstitutional, illegal effort to take health care away from people.
I don't
know if
state
you've
level.
seen it's Idaho again making national headlines. In deciding that the Affordable Care Act doesn't apply here. That insurance companies will be able to sell crap plans that don't meet the consumer protection requirements of the Affordable Care Act because Butch Otter says so.
Oh, just that's all it takes, eh?
Apparently that's what they think.
Well,
because it's Idaho.
I guess. I mean, that's wrong, and I don't want to blame it all on Donald Trump and his fantasies about how stuff really works, but I do find there's a lot of correlation between Trump supporters and people who think that the chief executive of whatever the political entity is, some sort of demigod who just declares things to happen and they happen. That's the authoritarian bent of Republicans in general and Trumpists in particular. But.
Yeah. Well, and I think that they probably made a calculation. I would like to think that all of the governor's lawyers are not so stupid that they don't understand the supremacy clause. It's possible.
Yeah.
But they also think it's probably pretty likely that the Trump administration isn't going to take action against Idaho over the Affordable Care Act.
Now that's an opening. That could be true. And ordinarily, again, a good Justice Department says, despite the fact that we actually like this position that Idaho is taking, we need to protect the prerogatives of federal supremacy here. But they may, in fact, just be ordered to go home instead. And, they may, that's true. The danger is they may get the result that they want in Idaho and then come to the conclusion that federal supremacy doesn't apply in this arena because it didn't last time. And it was really just the federal government saying, we are supreme here, but we wanted this to happen, so cool. And that's all that we get.
It could happen.
I guess so.
It could also happen that insurance companies look at this and say, we can't do that. It's against the law. If we try to sell people crappy insurance policies that don't meet the requirements of the law, we could be sued.
Yeah.
So chances are nothing's going to come of this because insurance companies who do understand the law won't push it, won't try.
Well, that would be nice. And I guess that will probably require, and they may even be willing to help with coordinating it, but it will probably require overt threats of suit very early.
Yes.
So everyone threatened to sue your insurer.
Yeah.
They'll want it.
So that's Idaho. Because
that's tough.
Yeah. Because we really seem to think governing by lawsuit, I don't know. This happens a lot. We see a lot of Idaho challenging federal law and federal regulations and getting sued over it. And somehow Republicans in Idaho still think this is a good thing to be doing with taxpayer funds. So,
yeah, they like, Republicans everywhere enjoy being able to tell everybody that they're persecuted because they're constantly suing us and we always have to defend ourselves from our idiotic, the results of our idiotic policy that disregards law and legality at every opportunity. But, they're doing this to us and we're fighting back, and somehow they're even able to raise money over that. We're getting sued again. Send us your dollars.
Yeah.
Well, not unique to Idaho, but of course it is happening there now. See,
I heard that.
Yeah.
I heard.
What'd you hear, DJ? I mean, CJ. Call me either one. I acknowledge no mistakes. This is Greg's fault. Okay. He's constantly doing this when you're not here. Sometimes when you're around too. All right. Well, but okay.
Thank you for following me on that tangent. I know we hadn't planned that one, but
it's okay. Honestly, the best thing about having you on is now we do the show here. Whatever tangent we decide to take that morning, it just happens, and I think everybody enjoys having somebody else direct the tangents once in a while too.
It was a tangent, and partially because healthcare's at the top of my mind this morning because of a story I just wrote on about a man who won $1 million in New York on a scratch-off ticket in the lottery. And was going to use his $1 million first to go to the doctor because he hadn't been able to do that, and then maybe get a new pickup and maybe go on vacation. But he died of stage 4 cancer before he could do all of that because he hadn't been able to go to the doctor for so long because he was waiting to win the lottery to do it.
Wow. That's a hell of a story.
Welcome to America again.
Yeah. And does he count because he was rich at the end? I mean, do Republicans care because he was rich, or was it just he hadn't given us any of his rich money yet, so he's rich, but the kind of rich person we don't like.
Right. The undeserving rich because he was sick, too.
Oh, yeah, that is his fault. He brought it on himself. Apparently.
So that's the story today. And a story that's important because even under the Affordable Care Act, we're not there yet. For whatever reason, he was unable to get his health insurance because of the Affordable Care Act or through the Affordable Care Act. And knew he was sick, couldn't go to the doctor, finally got the money to go to the doctor and died anyway. So yeah, we still need healthcare reform.
Yes, I would think so.
Healthcare reform that makes it easy for people to access coverage. Makes it, like automatic. If you don't have health insurance, you're just automatically enrolled in Medicaid. We can try that.
Right. As opposed to just go to the emergency room, which is what they think is the answer.
Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about healthcare, having read that story, and what we need to do, and how it's not going to happen for a while until we get rid of this guy.
Yeah.
It was interesting last night. He only brought up Obamacare once.
How has he lost interest?
Touting the end of the individual mandate. Didn't talk about Trump care at all. So I'm thinking that we don't see any effort at repeal again, hopefully, this year. I know that there's no mood for it in the Senate. The House is still railing about it because it's the House. Apparently, Trump's willing to let it go. Apparently, getting rid of the individual mandate is enough for him, and he's going to stop fixating on it. So hopefully that means this is a fight we're not going to have this year.
Well, I hope so. I mean, there's any number of reasons why they might not have mentioned it, and ranging from he has declared victory, and so that's enough for him, to nobody on his staff is thinking about it because they're all, they have short attention spans generally, and there's not enough beating up of foreign people.
I think that was probably it. This was a Stephen Miller speech.
Yeah, he's never been an Obamacare thing for him.
No, it's all about immigration for him, and that was the bulk of the speech last night.
All right. Yeah, I mean, he even got around to making token mention of opioids, which he also has largely ignored. So it must mean something that there's no healthcare mention in the speech.
And he tied opioids to, of course, immigration.
Sure. Why not? Of course.
Because, all right, we're leaving the speech behind.
All right.
Because it's making me stabby again.
Okay, well, that's good enough reason. All right. Just connected everything.
Paul Ryan. We can get back to Paul Ryan.
I have no objection to that.
And this story, I sent you the link to the New York Times article about, and it's good to see Charlie Savage, who writes a lot on national security issues, on warrantless wiretapping. We've seen him there, and a lot of civil liberties issues. But now he's focusing his attention on the secret memo, which is not really a memo, as you pointed out.
Yeah, Georgia told us that. Good point made on Twitter the other day. I guess they just decided that memo made it sound like it was A, coherent, and B, official in some way.
Right. And it's just Devin Nunes cherry picking from as far as we know, something like a 400-page FISA report.
Okay.
And doing his 4 pages of bullet points from that.
Okay, so
highly cherry-picked, and as Christopher Wray, FBI director, says, highly inaccurate. So we'll see how long Wray lasts under Trump.
Yeah, I mean, if you fire one, you can fire them all. I say we need a new FBI director, and Devin Nunes needs a new job, so maybe they'll work that one out. But
right now, Devin Nunes has the full support of his old buddy Paul Ryan.
That guy.
And Paul Ryan, who out on the one hand says we need to cleanse the FBI.
Oh, yeah.
On the other hand says this memo has nothing at all to do with the Mueller investigation. No, it's a completely separate matter, he says. But when he's pressed by local reporters on Capitol Hill to talk about it, he doesn't want to. And he won't answer why we can't get released the Democratic memo that rebuts Nunes's memo. Blah, 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 procedure, blah, blah, blah. We have a process. The Intelligence Committee has to read it, blah, blah, blah. And why does that not apply to the Republican memo as well? It just doesn't. It just doesn't. Paul Ryan is not being particularly forthcoming, particularly honest, particularly concerned about national security. He's ready to let this memo go. Even though the intelligence community is saying no. In fact, the House Intelligence Committee voted to put it out there without even getting a briefing from the FBI about what was actually in the full FISA report, what the whole story is. They said, nope, we're going to do it without even that briefing. So they're flying blind, and Paul Ryan's A-okay with that.
Terrific. He must be a great constitutional officer. Not even a briefing, so it's I can almost sympathize. If it wasn't their job to read 400-page reports, I can almost sympathize with if they wanted to move swiftly, it being, well, it's too long for us to get a handle on. So why don't you come in here and tell us what it says briefly? But not even that. That's a little worrisome.
They don't want to know. And here's the thing. Paul Ryan probably does know, because Paul Ryan's in, do they call it another gang? I think it's another gang, the Gang of Eight.
Yes.
The leadership that hears pretty much the full story from the intelligence community on everything that they need to hear about.
Right.
Paul Ryan knows the story. He's heard it. He's gotten that briefing.
He wants it out anyway. The people who gave the briefing say, and so therefore, no. And Paul Ryan says, don't you mean therefore yes? We do not. We mean no. All right, then the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, not okay, but...
not okay.
Yeah.
Not at all okay.
By the way, just as a reminder where we were earlier in the discussion, there are things that Paul Ryan does want to keep secret. Of course,
yes.
He tape records them and they end up in the hands of the Washington Post. Good job on that. But the other things that the intelligence community said, nah, you know what? This, at least part of it, should stay secret. What? No. We should publish that and keep the Russian interference in the election secret. That's what we should be doing.
That's what we should be doing.
That doesn't really, that doesn't look good in this context either, right? You know, he's a guy who's clearly got his priorities backwards on what should be secret and what should be open. And he's on record saying, let's keep Russian interference in the election secret as a party matter. And then we're asking his opinion on whether or not actual intelligence should be released. which really isn't a party issue at all, but somehow they've turned it into one.
It's a party issue if you're Paul Ryan.
I guess so. Maybe everything is.
It's a party issue if you're a Republican. Period.
Yeah. Well, right. That's true. They all will just follow his lead on that, and they may not even know why or care. They think it's they're covered.
It's pretty astounding that tax cuts and deregulation is enough for Republicans to say, "A-OK, here's our government, Russia. Do with it what you will."
Right. It's up to you. We are not interested in it. We'll leave you a note about. There's just something about a bathtub. Somebody told me. Anyway, good luck.
Yeah,
I'm taking my lottery winnings and leaving.
Pretty much.
Well, do we? Has there been an examination of what the process that he's even alluding to? I know he would be circumventing the process anyway, but what that process is, and I think it's come up a lot in the context of people saying, well, why can't Democrats release their response to that? Do you know? I mean, or has there been someone else who knows?
Presumably it would be because there are, as they always say, sources and methods. Mm-hmm. There are things that the intelligence community says is, well, and the government has said is highly classified.
All right.
Not to be seen by any eyes other than people read in and people with clearance, like Devin Nunes, who absolutely should not have clearance.
Right. That's true.
So, I don't know if Adam Schiff, ranking on the House Intelligence Committee, would be able to do what Feinstein did on the Senate side as ranking member of Judiciary and release information. I don't know if Schiff could, and perhaps you do, find a way to release the Democratic rebutting memo.
I don't think I do, because this would presumably start with committee rules, and then of course there's the twist of intelligence and classification involved, overlying all of that. Although I guess I'd have to assume if they do in fact release the Republican memo and it initially reveals sources and methods, I suppose that any rebuttals to that information that would likewise reveal the same sources and methods already revealed by the Republican memo would become more or less fair game for release. But it may be that the rebuttal information comes from different sources. I suppose there's that. And I understand that the Democratic response is available to Democratic members of the House, but that they have to sign a non-disclosure agreement in order to read it. Of course, I suppose there's some question about whether or not once it's released, whether Democratic members wanted to enter it into the record on the House floor by reading it and depend on their speech and debate clause immunity. I don't know how that plays in the NDA context, or even how well it plays in the federal courts, given that they, consciously signed an NDA, and then, would they have signed it in good faith if they knew that they were going to do this? I don't know. But yeah, I'd like to get a fix on what are the rules exactly, and you only see snippets of it in the newspaper coverage, and all I've been able to glean from it is that there's some kind of 5-day approval process once the committee decides it wants to release it. But I don't even know what it is that they're releasing. It's not a report per se. I don't know what it is.
It's whatever Devin Nunes put in this thing.
Yeah.
And Trump is the one who ultimately decides if it's released.
Right. That was
and on the floor last night in his banter as he's leaving,
yes,
he says 100% it's going to be released.
Yes. Which, with his track record, I guess we'll have to say it's probably less than 50%, I guess is what he means. But he wants it released.
Ray is doing his best to keep it from happening, so.
All right. Well, that ought to set up an interesting conflict, and we'll see. Donald Trump is not the kind of person who can say, well, I differ with you on that, and I'm going to release it, but go on and do your job from here on in as planned. He's going to take that personally, and he's going to start looking at, can I fire, or do I need to fire, or can we try and undermine Ray now and run the same play that we ran against McCabe and continue to try to do with Mueller and others.
And we've done with Comey. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, how many FBI directors can you fire? I guess if you can fire one, you can do it all.
You can fire all of them.
Just keep going.
If you don't have a House of Representatives that cares and might impeach you over it.
Right. Yeah, and they have that at the moment. I would like to take that away from them. I
would too.
Okay, we can make that a goal.
We can make that a goal, and it's an achievable goal.
Yeah, true. And
provided we get to have an election in November.
Yes, that would be nice to be able to depend on. So. You never know with these guys. But
Mike Pompeo says, and coming from Mike Pompeo, that he's even admitting, Russia's going to be involved in the midterms in 2018. If he's saying, maybe this is something we should be worrying about a little bit. I mean, Mike Pompeo is not known for not being a party kind of guy.
Yeah, that is sort of unusual. It's inevitable, and I mean, you don't want to look foolish by saying no and then having it come true despite your denials. But I don't, that's sort of their stock and trade. So what are you worried about? But I don't know. Some part of him wants to look like he knows what's happening, or maybe it's just I want to look savvy.
He wants people to take him seriously as CIA director, so he can't deny it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether that's really a true thing anymore, but I guess I for whatever reason, other people seem comfortable denying it in positions of, official authority, but he wants to not be one of those guys. You hope that there's a glimmer of conscience in there, and it is exploitable, but I don't know if it really is.
I don't think it's Mike Pompeo. Yeah. If you followed his career at all in the House.
Right. I tried not to, but
yeah.
Okay. Well, all right. Let's see. I think we're about we're very nearly out of time. Although, if there's anything else we ought to be keeping an eye on, or something coming up later today, or
this is what's so hard. You cannot plan when you're following Donald Trump and politics in America these days. You can't plan ahead because something's always going to happen.
Yeah. And now that he's made his speech, I assume we'll see him return to Twitter shortly. And people have observed frequently that having to deliver a speech verbatim from a teleprompter is something that sometimes sets him off. And he feels.
And it hasn't appeared to this morning.
No, I guess he's just...
maybe he was exhausted from having to stand up for an hour and a half and
that's true.
Say all those words.
I know. That's a lot of work. It's thirsty work for him, and he can't really drink in front of everybody without having problems. Although I see they gave him a glass yesterday.
A small glass.
Definitely a good idea.
One that he could grasp in one hand.
Right. They should have given him a little... one of those two-handled sippy cups would have helped. But, all right, they managed to handle the hydration part of the test yesterday well, too. So, cleared all the bars. But, we were lucky to not see lots of validation, in glowing terms anyway, thrown out there for post-speech. So we'll count our blessings in that respect. And another one is that although we've come to the end of the show, we might very well expect you to be back next Wednesday, provided Donald Trump doesn't say anything.
If we're still here?
Yeah, right, hanging on. And hopefully, all right, none of our problem areas literally explode. And Well, Donald Trump doesn't give any hour-and-a-half speeches and drive you, batty. But we'll usually have a night's sleep in between anyway. So thanks again, Joan, for coming by and sharing thoughts on a difficult morning.
You're welcome. I will try to be a little bit more coherent and have an actual through line next week.
All right. There's only so much you can do when Donald Trump spends an hour and a half disorienting you.
It's true. I apologize.
No problem. We just like to hear from you and change things up a bit. So we'll look forward to it again next week. Thanks, Joan.
Absolutely, and we'll look for you on the front page of Daily Kos writing about...
Oh, yeah, you remembered that. Okay.
Yeah, I remembered that.
Look over there. Something happening. I don't know, something shiny. Okay, thanks, Joan. Now you've given me a task. My task now, though, is to turn things over to Justice Putnam for his program, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, coming up next on Netroots Radio. Plenty to absorb that I wasn't able to feed you in the first hour.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Some of the hot topics today, though, speaking of Paul Ryan, the Republican hoping to unseat him has recently used social media to post his list of, quote, Jews in the media who are out to get him, many of whom are, of course, not Jewish, but that hardly matters. It doesn't really set a great precedent. That and more coming next.